Greetings of love. The Recce Center of Excellence for the Science of Happiness was begun in IIT Kharagpur, realizing that happy engineers can change the world for better. The idea of Illumina Dr. Recce Singh was born. Presently, 10 courses are offered, some of which are Science of Happiness and Wellbeing, Happiness at Workplace, Measurement of Happiness, Sports and Wellbeing, Communication and Happiness, Ecological Wellness, Consumer Happiness, and others. The vision is to develop the center as a platform to nurture the science and practice of happiness through scientific perspective across research, academic programs, practice, and outreach. Researches are targeted in science and happiness, well-being of communities, organizations, individuals, various human species, technology, and practice. The mission is to facilitate a transformative journey beyond peace of mind, to be aware, wise, and create a deep and meaningful relationship with self and others. There are 10 projects including behaviometry, happiness in schools, wellness, B2B global partnership, and others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ankur.
Thank you, sir.
And a very warm welcome to Dr. Tia Kansara and to all our participants and members of the center, scholars, and dear friends. It's wonderful to see all of you here again for the 6th talk at the Recce Center. And at the outset, I'll request Dr. Archie Banerjee to introduce Dr. Kansara to the audience, and then we will look forward to her talk. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, good evening, good afternoon. It is my honor and privilege to be able to introduce Dr. Tia Kansara, our esteemed speaker for today's evening. Dr. Kansara is a multi-award winning entrepreneur, the youngest to ever receive the Royal Institute British Architects Honorary Fellowship. She is the co-founder of Kansara Hackney Limited, the first ISO certified sustainable lifestyle consultancy, and CEO of Replenish Art Limited, a cause and a collective action to protect the global commons. Hailed amongst the top 100 most influential leaders in tech by the Financial Times and Inclusive Boards, her clients include Coca-Cola, Bloomberg, the European Commission, Forbes, Formula One, MIT, and Siemens. Aside from being the UCL Bartlett's ambassador to the Gulf region and advisor to the Economic Times of India, she is an economist and future cities thought leader. In 2010, she wrote the brief and appointed the architects Foster Plus Partners for the Saudi American Bank's multi-million-dollar headquarters as the first female to judge a LEED Platinum building in Riyadh. Tia did her PhD at University College London, Energy Institute, on designing future cities and energy evaluation. She has extensive experience in the Arabian Gulf. During her PhD, she worked alongside MIT and the Urban Planning Council, the Executive Affairs Authority, Department of Municipal Affairs, Abu Dhabi Water and Electricity Authority, Regulation and Supervision Bureau to create the first energy baseline and comprehensive energy evaluation in the Gulf. In 2000, she was invited to present the International Baccalaureate IB to Lord Adonis, Educational Policy Advisor at the UK Prime Minister's Policy Unit, Cabinet Office. Trained at SOAS in Economics and South Asian Studies, whilst working with Bloomberg, she was employed by the Japanese Ministry of Education to modernize the teaching of the English syllabus for high schools in Japan. While in Japan, she translated the Sanskrit works of Lord Swaminarayan's Shikshapatri into Japanese. Her publications in peer-reviewed journals range from sustainable cities to human performance, health, and well-being. Presenting her findings at conferences internationally through social media. She has been invited to advise on sustainable cities for the government and private sector as well as at conferences around the world. In 2012, Tia was invited to present her views to President Holland and Ban Ki-moon on the UN initiative Sustainable Energy for All, and has since worked closely with the Abu Dhabi government to deliver manageable energy reductions in the built environment, presenting her findings at the World Future Energy Summit, Abu Dhabi. As a professional moderator, lecturer, and author, she has interviewed world figures and experts, moderating for Forbes, Coca-Cola, European Business Angels Network, and London Business School, and delivered keynote speeches on the future of cities. She has lectured at New Delhi School of Planning, Musashi Institute of Technology, KEA University, McGill University, University of British Columbia, School of Architecture and Planning, and School of Architecture, to name a few. An executive committee member of London Business School's Global Energy Summit and also a co-director of the International Cleantech Challenge. In association with the Club of Rome and the United Nations General Assembly, she has advised the royal family of Bhutan and past Prime Minister Jigme Thinley and Prime Minister Tshering Tobgay on the creation of an International Commission on Sustainable Economic Growth. I welcome Dr. Kansara now to begin her talk, and it is our privilege to have her with us today.
Everybody, thank you so much for that introduction. That is quite the bio. No idea. It probably hasn't been updated in the last 10 years, so I apologize. There's more to that complexity. But I wanted to say a really big thank you to the Recce Centre of Excellence at the Indian Institute of Technology in Gorakhpur. All of the most incredible professors that I've worked with for the last year, including Professor Priyadarshi and Samduda. Thank you for inviting me on your Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav on the science and practice of happiness. Before we begin, I was super curious about our audience, and we have a poll question that we're going to start with, and then another polling session at the end. So may we share our first two poll questions, and I'd love to know what the audience is thinking about this incredible topic of epigenetics, but of course beginning with a very simple question. Let me know when, Ankur, if you'd like to put that on the screen. First question, and you should be able to answer these now, is does your physical environment have an impact on the way that you feel? Yes or no? And the second question, does your physical environment impact you mentally, physically, emotionally, all of the above, none of the above? And I'd love to know what the results are. So I'll give you a minute to answer that. Are we able to see the results live?
I think we can see them at the end once the poll closes.
Okay. Okay, brilliant. Right, let's have a look at the results. Oh my gosh, look at these. That's really fascinating in terms of what we consider our relationship with not just our environment, but also how our environment can have an impact on who we are and how we behave. Thank you very much for answering that poll. I'd love to be able to now share my screen, if I may. I think we have to end the poll. And Right.
The poll has ended, ma'am. You just cross the polling option.
Let me know when you can see my screen, please. Are you good?
Yes, we're good.
Brilliant. So, if you're thinking of living in harmony with nature, it's a super daunting step for a business to transition away from fossil fuels. And with our help, we make that process deeply imaginative, creative, and fun. At Replenish Earth, we work on climate resilience and adaptation, consulting and advisory on factors that relate to climate strategy, risk, and investment. Here are, a current suite of some of the services that we provide. We're amongst the first organizations to drive net positive in our actions as a business, but then also through our clients, where we consult on the end-to-end business innovation strategy and look very specifically at the kind of services that a business may be providing. Sometimes they're project related, so it's always very, very interesting to see, where we are with that. My journey on this topic spans about 31 years, and I am incredibly, I am incredibly fascinated with the way that people build, live, and improve their well-being. You'll see it across all of my childhood work on physical fitness to the time I've spent traveling across 90 countries and worked with 120 governments, and all to try and understand the human need to relate, connect, and share, that I feel is deeply embedded in my pursuit of a wholesome life. My PhD began with a very, very simple question. How does one live a sustainable lifestyle? One that is in balance with nature, has technology that supports all living beings, and also can be measured. Of course, I'm not a medical doctor, so please do take these musings as they are my personal experience and an opportunity to delight in my intellectual curiosity. Here are some of the clients that we've worked with. We are going to have time at the end for questions, so please do share them in the comments and hopefully we can get through them, and if not, you can also post them on social media. We're all aware that this has been a very strange time for humanity, and it's quite fascinating to know that we're currently living in the phase that we may look back at one day with some curiosity, some wonder. It's also empowering to know that we can still control this narrative and figure out the best development of this story. What are some of your epiphanies from the lockdown? You can use the comments function. Please do share some of your experiences of moments that you've had, aha and ahums. During the lockdown, for me, I was in isolation with my family, and I was also connected to many dear ones through video and phone calls. We're all getting used to this kind of new code of conduct, understanding the nuances of interpretations of privacy, personal space in different social settings that we've recreated virtually, physical distancing in person whilst still virtually connected. I think it's been evident that most of us were going through relatable traumas and challenges without knowing how to respond. But in some cases, there were unprecedented behaviors. So have we unaccounted for the impact of these circumstances on us? We love to connect the dots and find patterns, but when we notice an anomaly, curious researchers, I'm sure like yourselves, question what sets us apart. We may point towards mental health or well-being practices when it comes to individual experiences that can't seem to be narrowed down to any known social patterns we're seeing across communities, but what impacts their behavior and their response to a calamity that hasn't been personally addressed or acknowledged by them. This is where epigenetics plays an important role in personal experience and well-being. I'd like to ask the audience quickly if there are any twins. Are you a twin? Do you know a twin? Do you wonder how twins inherit similar DNA but develop distinct personalities while growing up under pretty simple, like similar influences? Does the physical environment impact their mental growth, their emotional development? I think we're going to explore some of these a little bit. So let's begin with a broader understanding of the environment. This refers to our surroundings, the spaces we inhabit, the places we visit, the atmosphere we're exposed to. Architects, planners, designers, and urban developers are involved in meticulously designing the built environment to make them functional, aesthetically pleasing, and efficiently connected. And of course, with a slew of all of the smart designs and technology that we're experiencing as well, we're seeing a whole era of change in this area. But as inhabitants of the environment, we often participate in systems that enhance our lifestyle and keep us in this kind of loop. We also feel like we're part of a community that lives, breathes, and sustains together. The built environment also affects us psychologically and physiologically. Mental health and well-being have notable effects due to the changes in the built environment. Factors like indoor air quality, interior layout, lighting, access to nature, color, noise, thermal comfort, user control of space, and engaging elements. Think of certain rooms that you really like. All of these can impact our mood and behavior. Several studies that we've come across show the impact of daylight on human psychology and mood. It also commonly observed, there's a number of different studies on patients who have been admitted to rooms with more sunlight and visual access to greenery recover faster and better when compared to patients living in rooms with no windows, for example, and no ventilation, imagine. So at Replenish Earth, one of the key areas that we work on is ecotherapy, which involves practices that connect us with nature. With the sheer presence of natural elements in our surroundings, we can yield better cognitive functioning, more self-discipline, impulse control, and balanced mental health overall. Imagine the results of living within nature, coexisting with fellow beings and being less intrusive towards natural resources and environments. As we develop cities at the cost of natural environments, we are more prone to developing drastic mental health conditions, a plague that might not be as visible as the current pandemic, but equally, if not more, concerning to humanity. Less access to nature is linked to exacerbated attention deficit, higher rates of anxiety disorders, and higher rates of clinical depression. Something like interior design can have profound effects on the psychology of your health as it governs the immediate surroundings that you are in, the immediate environment of a person, and sets a tone for their daily habits, daily routines. And apart from making functional utilitarian spaces that look good and feel comfortable, interior design can determine the quality of light entering our spaces, the level of privacy we can attain, and the degree of interaction with nature. Research on environmental psychology by the University of Victoria suggests that some of the main psychological in regards to spatial allocations include territoriality, personal space, privacy, and crowding. 2 is a company, and 3 is a crowd. I think you've heard that many a time before. This applies to social situations as well. Did you watch the cricket finals? You know, we know how crowds can be fun, even motivating at a cricket, football, basketball game. Don't we miss the sort of like the cheers and the echoes across a stadium? We don't call that noise. And similarly, watching a movie at a theatre filled with hundreds of spectators is an experience we all kind of long to have once in a while. For those in Australia who are in isolation, you know, that being amongst one of our fellow like-minded people, never feel like it's an actual crowd to be in a place where you want to be surrounded. But imagine waiting in line at a crowded hospital when a friend of yours has an emergency, or even simply taking the elevator at full capacity can be overwhelming sometimes. Even more so now as we've adapted to this physical distancing. There are some examples where a crowd-based behavior changes depending on the circumstances that crowd is in. But as an individual, our responses are very nuanced and deeply intrinsic to our personality. Some people feel stressed at social gatherings, some may experience anxiety while getting dressed to meet their friends or even colleagues for dinner. We may feel a sudden sense of being intruded upon or losing our personal space. That can make social activities daunting. We loosely call these people shy, but I think we fail to notice when this behavior disrupts their personal, professional and social lives. And I really feel that sort of people experiencing social anxiety show physical symptoms in tense situations. And these may include like stuttering or rapid heart rate, awkward blushing, excessive like sweat, or even nausea. Psychological symptoms may include worrying about the situation way in advance, like missing work or school, a deep sense of embarrassment, guilt, avoidance. It's normal to face these symptoms, rarely for much of kind of like an anticipated event, but important to note that when this becomes a norm for social engagement, there is really an issue there underlying. And you may avoid interviews, skip using public restrooms, or the need to set up meetings, even asking questions in a seminar like this, about the kind of anxiety that any one person can actually experience. And researchers have not been able to pinpoint one underlying cause for social anxiety. Rather, they've kind of narrowed it down to two broad areas that have a large say in these behavioral patterns. And these are environmental factors and genetics. We've already looked at the kind of environment, the physical environment factors that impact human behavior, but now we'll be scaling down from broadly based external factors towards a very personal intrinsic factor called genetics. What does genetics comprise of? Genetics is the branch of biological study that deals with heredity and a variation of organisms. Genes are the basic physical functioning units of a human. In humans, genes vary in size from a few hundred DNA-based bases to more than 2 million bases. The Human Genome Project has estimated that humans have between 20,000 and 25,000 genes. Every person has 2 copies of each gene, one inherited from each parent. And to put it simply, genetics is the study of how different qualities, called traits, are passed down from parents to children. Genetics helps explain what makes you unique, why family members look alike, why some diseases run in families. When we trace the paths of these qualities, we're following packages of information called genes. And in conclusion, each person has a particular set of genes that form their unique genetic makeup. So identical twins who inherit the same genetic formula must be clones, right? Going back to our sort of first question of this session, why do twins develop distinct behavioral personalities, even when they share genes, and in most cases, probably the same environments during their growing, the kind of like their childhood. And this is largely because of the individual's epigenetics. Imagine a supervisor and their minions who are in charge of turning the on-off buttons for each gene in your body at specific times for specific environments to create certain behaviors. Epigenetics research deals with the study of the factors that cause these actions. It's a study of how your behavior and environment can cause changes that affect the way your genes work. And unlike genetic changes, epigenetics changes are reversible and do not change your DNA sequence, but they can change how your body reads a DNA sequence. Epigenetic modifications don't change your DNA, but they do prevent or allow certain genes to make the specific proteins that make us who we are. And over time, this process can alter your physical traits, change the course of a specific health condition, and transform your overall health. So epigenetics alters the physical structure of your DNA. One example, which I think is, incredible, is the epigenetic change in DNA methylation. This is the addition of a methyl group or a chemical cap to part of the DNA molecule, which prevents certain genes from being expressed. Another example is histone modification, where researchers are currently experimenting with epigenetic changes to see how positive behaviors can be genetically produced by altering the epigenetics of the system. Studies proved that stressed pregnant women were more likely to have children who are more susceptible to metabolic autoimmune diseases as their genes were responding to the stress even before birth. That's like prenatal. Unfortunately, epigenetics not only provides us the key to unlock genetic patterns, but also the power to turn the lock, alter the system, and lock it back again. We can now reprogram our genes to have better mental health and well-being. But can we deprogram or unlearn destructive behaviors or illnesses? Moshe Sif is an epigenetics expert, and I would highly recommend his TEDx Bratislava talk on Our Bodies, way to change the destiny written in our DNA. One of the highlights of this talk was a discussion on how cocaine addicts were genetically transformed to lose their addictive behavior. Tweaking their genetic formula has allowed us to deprogram their addiction. They weren't triggered by the prospect of taking drugs or even affected by the presence of it. This is super powerful as a tool that lets us reset our narrative as individuals and more so as a community. So if this is a unique feature of one's genetic makeup, does that imply that epigenetic changes are exceptional to our genetic legacy? Or do we get to make these changes and pass on these behaviors? Transgenerational epigenetic inheritance is the transmission of epigenetic markers from one organism to another, i.e. from parents to their children, that affect the traits of the offspring without altering the primary structure of DNA. The kind of sequence of nucleotides. In other words, epigenetics behavioral patterns can be passed on to up to 3 generations. That's what we know at the moment. Who knows, maybe even more. And a classic example of transgenerational epigenetic inheritance is the trauma response passed on from the survivors of the Holocaust. A 2015 study found that children of the survivors of the Holocaust had epigenetic changes to a gene that was linked to their levels of cortisol, a hormone involved in the stress response. This study, though conducted on a very small group with limited generational data, marked an important discovery in mental health studies on the legacy of trauma. These kinds of controlled experiments in animals have also proven an intergenerational relationship of the effect of trauma associated with scent, the smell. Imagine the different kinds of responses that we can actually have in an environment because of the way that we've interacted or what we've actually inherited. The researchers blew acetophenone, which has the scent of cherry blossom, through the cages of adult male mice, zapping their feet with an electrical current at the same time. And overall, with these repetitions, the mice associated the smell of cherry blossom, sakura, with pain. Shortly afterwards, these males bred with female mice, and when their pups smelled the scent of cherry blossom, they became more jumpy and nervous than pups whose fathers hadn't been conditioned to fear it. To rule out that the pups were somehow learning about the smell from their parents, they were raised by unrelated mice who had never smelt cherry blossom. So the grandpups of the traumatized males also showed heightened sensitivity to the scent. So neither of the generations showed a greater sensitivity to smells other than cherry blossom, indicating that the inheritance was specific to that scent. And this kind of sensitivity to cherry blossom scent was linked back to epigenetic modifications in their sperm DNA. Chemical markers on their DNA were found on a gene encoding a smell receptor expressed in the olfactory bulb between the nose and the brain, which is involved in sensing the cherry blossom scent. When the team dissected the pups' brains, they also found there was a greater number of neurons that detect the cherry blossom scent compared with control mice. And as stated in the study that was published by BBC Futures, the second and third generation appear to have not a fear of the scent itself, but a heightened sensitivity to it. The findings bring to light an often missed subtlety of epigenetic inheritance, that the next generation doesn't always show exactly the same trait that their parents developed. It's not that they fear is being passed down, as I mentioned. It's the fear of a scent in one generation that leads to a sensitivity to the same scent in the next. I think the consequences of this study are huge now that we realize that however subtle we may pass down our trauma, just as much as we may have inherited something from our parents. It changes our perception of life, of living, in the context of our parents' experiences that we know now can impact our physiological and mental health directly. Imagine the stories, the experiences themselves, being in that environment, and knowing that the consequences of our own actions and experiences now could also affect the lives of our children, even long before they are conceived. Could have these sorts of prenatal traumas that we never even knew existed, right? Drawing these inferences to understand our current scenario, how do we plan to write our mental health legacy? How can we reprogram community well-being and deprogram pandemic-led isolation trauma, let's say? We all have experienced a sudden health alarm as a global society and have incorporated healthy habits and physical exercise into our daily routines. But how seriously do we take our mental health, and what do we do on a daily basis to be our fittest? So let's create a simple daily checklist. Here, for all of us gathered in this talk, I want you to move your body, interact with nature, take deep breaths, get rest, and create and appreciate beauty. Have awe in your life every day as a practice. You're welcome to take this screenshot. Haripriya designed it incredibly well from our team, and add it to your daily calendar as a reminder. And if we're too busy to take care of ourselves, how do we take charge of a planetary crisis or solve global problems together? Each system is only as good as its weakest link. Each human being is only as good as its weakest part. I believe that as we grow older, the more time we spend taking care of ourselves, the more our body will take care of us in the future. Before I conclude, I urge you to maintain a mental journal. Thoughts, emotions, feelings, any way that you can transform and move the energy, a heavy energy, a light energy, it doesn't really matter, but it's passing it through your body and into a creative pursuit like writing or singing, and maintain that every day. I don't think it's an occasional task, right? So be more exposed to that epigenetic behavior shift in your environment, in your routine as a discipline. So there we have it. I'd be more than happy to respond to your Instagrams or LinkedIn comments on our socials. You can follow us on your preference of social media, and please do share this YouTube recording with people who will benefit from taking control of their environment and improving their mental, emotional, and physical health. And of course, there is a part 2 to this talk at the Rhythm of Happiness conference in December, which I'm sure the team will share with you. We have one more poll, and then we're going to move to questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Thank you, everyone.
Dikanto, can you have the next
Sorry,
poll?
sir. This is Ankur. Because of, I think, some glitch, we are unable to put the second poll. So, can we use some alternative method to put it in front of audience?
Yeah, why don't you read the question out, and people in the audience can write them in the comments.
Pachi, can you do that, please?
1 second, just.
So also in the meantime, if you're ready for the conversation, I'm going to read through the notes, and also ready for any questions that anybody has either on YouTube or on WebEx.
Thank you, Dr. Tia Kansara, for this excellent talk. It's so nourishing, so enlightening for all of us. We have people listening from Bhutan, the country which people say a happy nation. You know, probably what you're talking about, I think all that fits in for Bhutan. But we also have people from Singapore, Philippines, England as well, and India, of course, listening today to your talk. Some takeaway. I mean, the first important thing is, I think, you brought out to say what Replin's Earth represents. And we are really proud of your contribution to the global life and livelihood in terms of how to really create a happier atmosphere for ourselves. I think what I took from the talk is that the epigenesis is something that can be nurtured. It's not genetically that could be there, but it comes as the architects would call as a design, a blueprint, which could be transferred by our behavior in the environment we live, so that we can change completely our way of life and living. So that's a takeaway I take, and I would request, of course, Mr. Ankur Shukla, who is our PhD scholar, to thank Dr. Tia Kansara and to take forward with question and answer here from. Thank you, Dr. Tia.
Thank you very much, sir. So now I request our participants to please either you can type your questions in the chat box or you can use the raise hand option, and then once I prompt you, you can ask it directly. Anyone, please.
Thank you, Ankur.
Yeah.
With your permission, may I ask a question?
Sure, sir, sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kansara, for a wonderful talk, very insightful, I would say, new area for many of us. That just a query, there's something which is intriguing me. We can have experience of trauma and bad experiences, which can also get transmitted. And we can have good experiences which can get transmitted. Knowing fully well that our brains are more geared to negative experiences because that helps in our survival. I mean, if a person has a very intense bad experiences followed by good experiences, how does the genes react? Any observations, any comments on that?
That's a really interesting question. Firstly, from the perspective of there being almost a preference for the negativity, right? Because it's almost as if it's like, oh my God, don't want that to happen again. So ensure that that doesn't happen. I need to remember it. So it's almost like unpegging the cortisol that's related to a past negative experience. But there's also this piece on, are there very specific internal and external factors and epigenetics, which I find really fascinating. It's almost as if you could say that a room can change your brain, right? That's it. It's as simple as that. It's the way that you are being accustomed and trained in a physical environment can change the way that you behave. And because there is this connection point between the external factors and positive, negative, almost it's like this kind of a nudge, somewhat of these nudges that are happening at every moment. And I feel that with the kind of negative, positive, and I'm sorry to paint negative perspectives, but I see life as a rainbow with the unicorn. I'm sorry I had to say that. But the reason why I say the rainbow is because for a lot of people, maybe their preference is just to be happy all the time. But for me, I feel the rainbow is almost like the full spectrum of emotions that I can feel. And so, the full spectrum of emotions, I am almost equanimous to, because that is part and parcel of what life will bring to me. So I think there is almost like a predisposition to certain emotional content in one's life. And there is a movement across those the experiences of life that can then have an impact on the way that we translate those narratives to ourselves. So what's fascinating about the epigenetics, and this is the angle that I'm sort of kind of going towards, is if we can then take that back in and recognize what are those triggers that are more negative or positive and understand that about ourselves, could we then nudge the environment to also then reignite and reinforce behaviors that we do want to see in our lives, feelings that we want to have in our lives, experiences that we want to have in our lives, and how can the relationship between the self and other, or the self and the environment, be a mirror to this? I don't think I answered your question at all.
Thank you very much for the insights. It's a really fascinating area, and there must be so many intriguing things that get linked to it, right? Because this brings in the concept of mental aptitude as well. Because some people react differently to the same environment, and that in its input reflect on the way that the genes respond or kind of react to that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
May I have one question?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So, Dr. Kansara, it was a wonderful talk. I was just curious about the duration of exposure you need.
I love that question. What a great question. I don't have an answer to it. I'm curious about that same question, you know, and I feel that almost as if is it the exposure time, right? Or is it the reinforcement of a couple of seconds all the time?
Yeah.
So is it the fact that you are exposed once, but for an hour, that could have a massive effect? Or would you be exposed every day for a few seconds that would then reinforce that memory? It's almost as if there's almost one element of that is the way that the brain memory can create a response, right? But it's what is it that reinforces that memory of it, and then how do you enhance that or extract that? So yeah, amazing question. I just added a few more questions onto it too.
And about the question she wanted to have in the poll after her talk, should I speak it to the audience?
Yeah.
Yeah, the question was, do you feel more aware about the control you have over your physical environment? You can answer in yes or no. So I request everyone to answer.
And I'm also going to add, the reason why I asked this question is because when we assessed about maybe 1,500 occupants of buildings in Abu Dhabi, it was a very simple question through a survey that we used with the Building and Use Studies Foundation. And Bill Bordas and Adrian Lehman have spent years trying to understand how to give feedback for a building. And of course, for most other items, let's say you buy a camera or a TV or whatever, you'll purchase something and then maybe you'll look at the reviews and make sure that that is in alignment with what you're buying. Is there, you know, feedback on the actual product? The business can use it to improve the product. Amazon can use it to improve the service of getting that product to you. So there's a lot of feedback in improving our experience and, you know, the use of an item. But for buildings, we don't have so much of that. We've got something called post-occupancy evaluation. How many people do that? It's a costly survey. There's a lot to do with how a building can affect your mood and place. But did you know you have control over it? You have control to open the blinds, close the blinds. You have control to change the layout of things in your room, the color of the walls, to how many plants you've got in there. So, of course, the mechanism of understanding that we have the empowered state to be able to change anything in our social and physical environment, our emotional environment. And it's beautiful because often, you know, of course, you may say that on a hermetically sealed building, you can't open the windows on the 40th floor, Dr. K. Okay. But you can have regular breaks and go outside and get some fresh air, or go and find a little tree that you can put at the side of your desk. There's so many things that, even if they are small, are the small nudges, I think, that could be really powerful.
Thank you, Archie. And I think one of our scholars, Subhashini, raised hand. So Subhashini, please go ahead and ask your question if you are here.
I believe they need to be unmuted first. So Diganta needs to unmute them, otherwise they can type in their questions.
I'm also going to add that although epigenetics isn't new, the relationship with epigenetics to the built environment, to well-being, to all of these incredible disciplines is so explorative. Like right now with the studies, for example, with like smell, sound, behaviors, nudges, anchoring, you know, even if you were to take it from the economics or the psychology and the psychology of economic behavior in markets and things like that, there are nudges that anchor certain behaviors, even in the marketplace, or even to, you know, a group of people in a business where, you know, there may be an introduction to a kind of a product and how to understand how the market is going to receive it, the go-to-market strategy, the marketing of that, why it is the way that it is, to almost the behavior of, the few to the mass, right? Like the behavior of a mass of people may be more understandable than the behavior of a few. So you might look at a couple of clicks on Facebook and think, okay, that's your behavior. But then, Facebook also studies the behavior of a massive group of people and how they then shift their kind of understanding. I'm also going to riff that, physical environment. What about digital environments? What about, when you're looking at a piece of art on a screen, where do your eyes go? The heat map of eye movements on a piece of art is in itself a study, and you can see many of these images. Where, for example, if you're looking at a famous piece like Da Vinci's Last Supper, you'll see like where people's eyes are moving. And so in say a Caravaggio, where you've got that sort of light dark feature, or chiaroscuro, where you can see certain aspects of a piece of art, there's real understanding and study on the way that something is projected, experienced. And so, yeah, I mean, there's so much that one can do in this field. It's shocking.
Thank you. So there is one question from Govinda, I guess. He wants to ask, you mentioned about engineering DNA and reprogramming DNA of cocaine addict. Is there a slight possibility to re-engineer DNA of the ones suffering from chronic immune disease or any other disease and recorrect them to be normal again? Thank you.
So premise, I'm not a doctor. One of the core areas that I think for a number of years my mom had arthritis, and there were certain factors at home that led her to become more aware of Ayurveda and nutrition and diet, and factors just in the home from a kind of a homely perspective. But because of that, because of her curiosity, we all became curious of taking health into our own hands, recognizing where our food, where the food was coming from, the soil content, the exploration of any chemicals in our food, any kind of ready-made items, what kind of ingredients were there, were not there, to the extent where certain chemicals and compounds are not included in an ingredients listing because they have a license to keep it private. And so I think there is a huge amount of curiosity there in you, and I think you should explore different methods and ways that, not just from the environmental perspective, but behavioral perspective. Are there certain dietary perspectives that that lead a person towards a better physical and mental state? And I think the answer is yes. We have to explore that. I feel this sort of causality, right? Like a trigger and then a response. I feel as if, if you do this, then maybe it's not so causality driven. Maybe there is no if then statement. Perhaps it's this sort of epigenetic relationship that we're exploring right now. Maybe there is even more to this than we even thought possible. Maybe we have, I remember, and this is totally going off-piste, I hope you don't mind, Sandhu, but there was this amazing yoga ashram in Wales that my family went to about 20-something years ago. And sitting in a cafe was a researcher that was looking at the bioelectricity around a plant. And she had to repeat it a couple of times because my brain just didn't wrap around what she was trying to say. But she was effectively suggesting with her research that plants were projecting energy, and that could be mapped and looked on with visual sort of aid, like a computer that could actually almost take a scan of where there was a bioelectric signal that was coming out of the plant. I may have mucked up all of the terminology for it, hands up, I don't know, but I remember this amazing piece of research this lady was doing. And she had translated this research over the course of, I think, a couple of years. and she was observing what would happen with the plant. So let's say this was a plant. So not very plant-like, but let's say this is a plant, and then from here you would get like a shoot coming up, and then it kind of grows energetically. So what your eyes see is this Garuda Puran, but what your computer is mapping is this extension piece. What she found was that the plant would grow into its projection. The plant would grow into its electrical signal. So if a plant is able to project a certain image of what it wants to become through creative, somewhat visualization or whatever you would call it, then, where are we as humans and in our capability to forecast a very clear message of where we want to go and what we want to do and how we want our bodies and our minds to behave?
Thank you. So the next question is again from Subhashini. So she wants to ask, environment is perceived from an individual lens. How do we personalize environment for every individual to improve well-being? Thank you.
This is such a great question. Thank you for asking that. If only we knew, right? If only we knew. If only we knew earlier that I could have had a better mood if I was going out and getting natural daylight in my eyes between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. If only we knew that, there are certain characteristics of an environment that could really improve the way that we feel, or how somebody else feels when they walk into our space and how they interact. I do this all the time. I'm probably the most annoying person to go out with, because I'll go into a physical space and I will want to reconfigure it immediately. And the reason why I feel like that is because I feel really sensitive to an environment. And so if there isn't enough daylight, or if I don't feel as if I can see more of a living force of energy around me through plants and, animals, that's why I like the wild so much, then I'll feel some kind of like a draining feeling. I feel drained in environment. And that could also be from mold. It could be from the spores of the mold. It can be from the quality or lack of quality of the air, lack of quality of, the kind of materials that are used in an environment. Imagine formaldehyde, it's sniffing that every single day with cheap materials that are, kind of quick turnaround products that we put in our space. Imagine fumes that are coming out of wallpaper glue, I don't know, paints on walls. I mean, it is insane how much you can explore this topic, because there is so much that you can change if but you're the only person who is going to go out there and find that out, because it's probably not in the interest of some company that is selling some weed killer that our farmer can use to even kill himself, right, in India. So what are you going to do about it is my question to you. How are you going to take actions and change your environment, your social environment, your physical environment to suit what you need? And, this is an exploration for yourself. It's an exploration of your physical body and your sensations inside your body. Note, okay, experiment number 1, go into all the rooms that you go into, whether it be your university or your business office or your government department, and observe. Every experience is subjective first. And what does that mean? It means that every experience that you have through your senses is a subjective experience that you are having. So if you go into a room and you feel a bit down, why? Ask. If you go into a room and you feel uplifted, why? Ask. I think that there is this relationship between our curiosity and our ability to imagine a different environment for ourselves. And I'm not just talking about buildings and cities. I'm talking about being in the wild, being, amongst people that can support our missions in life. There is a huge amount that we have agency over, 100% of agency over, even when we're in an environment that we don't want to be in, like being isolated at home, maybe you can change the way that your room looks and feels. Even if you're in an environment where you're not happy, that you could change the environment of your brain, of your inner sanctum, that you could change the way that you saw it. Okay, not a nice experience to go through, but how have you decided that you're going to meet that experience? How are you going to decide that you will narrate that story? Yes, you can turn around and say that, I had this trauma and I had that experience. And the difference, of course, with the pandemic is that the majority of us have had that experience. Do we have to see it as a trauma? No. Maybe I had this great opportunity to meditate every single day with not having to go on the underground for half an hour. Maybe it gave me a chance to get to learn more about my niece and my nephew and explore, my niece's first steps that she took because I was physically present, not gallivanting around the world. So yes, total agency over your life.
Thank you very much. So since we are, I think, close to the end schedule of ours, so maybe one last question. So Mohit wants to ask, I think it is related to what you were answering, that how to come out of a emotional trauma caused by the negative outside environment. What can be the ways? Maybe he wants to ask. Thank you.
I kind of think that I answered it in the previous response. I think there's something really beautiful between an action and a reaction, and I think one could say that this is what's happening right now, but how you respond to that is what matters. It's an environment. Let's say a car goes past you, and you can meet that situation or experience or someone shouting at you with a quick reaction. When you look at Daniel Kahneman's work on, thinking fast and slow, the kind of first and second responses to certain behaviors, right? Am I going to do a very quick shout at somebody because they just almost ran me over? Or am I going to learn to sort of take a step back and then kind of almost rebalance my emotional state before I go out there and respond? So I think that again gives us the agency of knowing that yes, there is a quick response. Anyone can shout their heads off in a car and rage at someone else, but anyone can wave a finger at some person that's doing something that we don't agree with. But ultimately, we're able to have some level of response that we can slow action to response time, right? We can slow that, and somebody would probably go into way more detail about this than I would, but we can slow that time down and we can have a different response if we so wished.
Thank you very much.
Ankur, I think we missed a question from Hai. She's from Singapore, and she wrote a question before Subhashini. So it says, is DNA reengineering possible to assist in the slowdown or reverse aging in our human aging cells, especially in Singapore when we are soon going to face an aging tsunami by the year 2030?
I love your question. Explore the work explore the work of the, can't remember the exact name of this gentleman, but he's an MD in the US, and he does a lot of work on intermittent fasting and just fasting like water fasts. But I would really encourage whoever asked that question to explore the manner in which our physical, body and diet and nutrition has a part to play in aging, and the relationship of size of the telomeres of the chromosomes. I think there's something really interesting there. Again, not a medical doctor. See how interesting it is to kind of navigate all of these different aspects. And then, of course, you've got the inner, the outer, you've got all of these different disciplines that connect with the human form, which I find really beautiful.
So
I'm
thank you very
sure
much.
there are so many questions at the moment. I'm so sorry. Like, I think there's a lot of beautiful curiosity that I can feel right now in the digital room, and I would love for you to think about this, take these thoughts away, ask more questions, find out things, send them to me. I'd be curious about them. Maybe the Recce Center would be interested in actually opening a center for opening a study of the epigenetics of well-being, and we can go and explore this at length to our heart's content.
Thank you very much. So now, because our speaker wishes to, I request again to all the people here, if you can please switch on your video so that we all can enjoy each other's presence in a way. And now I would like to request our head of the center, Professor Patnaik, to offer vote of thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Ankur. I believe that the privilege is Sandhuda's. That's what we had discussed. So may I request Sandhuda to propose the vote.
So please unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. Well, it's an absolute honor for me to thank a dear friend of mine that I know for so long now. This has been an absolute, enlightening talk today for all of us. This is something very close to our hearts all the time, to live longer, to live well, but then we always miss the journey, where to get in and how to get in. But your guidance has been so very powerful for all of us. And I know that we will find our direction. Thank you so much, Dr. Tia Kansara, for being there for us. And we know that you will not leave us here. And we are sure that you will be here at IIT to enlighten us in physical presence here at the Recce Center. And what you're talking about, a center for epigenetics, we already have a candidate who introduced you, Dr. R.G. Banerjee, right there. So, everything falls in place. We all have to have good thoughts, and I think the universe provides. So thank you so much for this wonderful talk. We look forward to December, because I think friends out there from Bhutan, from Singapore, from Philippines, please, in December from 9th till 12th, we have another conference, an international conference known as Rhythms of Happiness. So you please register yourself. It's free. You can join us and benefit from great talks from people like Dr. Tia Kansara. We have the globe will come together to give us wonderful discourse on the rhythms of happiness. So with this, I'll end my gratitude, full of gratitude to you, to everyone out there who has taken time to come and listen to us today, from Bhutan, from Singapore, from Philippines, of course, all my friends from India, and as far as Mexico, I saw somebody there, but I think she's left. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to be here so that, we made not only ourselves a greater day, but we also joined, although very digitally, hands together to thank Tia Ji very much for her time, for her energy. Thank you so much. And let's cross our fingers so that we will see you in IIT Kharagpur next time. Thank you.
Really looking forward to it. Thank you all very, very much, and have a beautiful day.